One afternoon, a young woman set out for a bike ride but never made it back home. Her sudden disappearance sparked one of the largest search operations the city had ever seen, quickly drawing national media attention. Detectives chased down thousands of tips and looked into hundreds of possible suspects. However, each lead ended up being another dead end. That's where the case remained, until an unexpected twist revealed a chilling reality. Ardis Wood was born on October 28, 1975, in St. John, Canada. She later became a proud older sister to two younger brothers. Before the family settled in Ottawa, Ardis attended a Catholic school and later pursued her education at a university, focusing on history and philosophy. After earning her degrees, her thirst for knowledge compelled her to further her academic journey. She enrolled at another university near Toronto to work toward a doctorate in philosophy, driven by a deep passion for her subject and the dream of teaching at a prestigious university one day. Her professors frequently lauded her intellect, often commenting that chatting with her felt more like engaging with a peer rather than a student. Outside of academia, she embraced an active lifestyle, enjoying swimming, running, and cycling as her preferred activities. She also envisioned a future filled with a large family and was in a serious relationship, making plans with her boyfriend. After completing her doctorate in the summer of 2003 at 27 years old, Ardis returned to Ottawa to spend 2 weeks with her family. Her university was about 300 miles away, making visits infrequent, and the distance strained their close-knit family. During her time off, she aimed to cherish every moment with her loved ones. On the morning of August 6th, Ardis woke up early and went for a run. Once back home, she prepared a strawberry dessert for her parents and brothers. Later that day, she had planned to go shopping with her mother, but the weather forecast warned of heavy rain. Wanting to seize the beautiful weather while it lasted, when the main ended as private, Ardis opted for a quick bike ride first. She reassured her mother that she would return in approximately an hour and a half, borrowed her brother's bike, and took off. But an hour and a half later, as the skies unleashed the anticipated rain, Ardis had still not returned home. Her mother thought she might have been caught in the downpour, likely waiting for the rain to ease up at a nearby shelter. But as time went by and the rain finally subsided, Ardis was still missing. Growing increasingly anxious, her mother called her husband, who promptly set out with their sons to search for her. They drove along Long Park Trail, a popular route for cyclists in the city. As children, Ardis and her brothers had spent countless hours biking there, making it the most likely place she would have gone. But it was merely an assumption. Ardis hadn't specified her route before leaving, and despite their thorough search, her father and brothers found no trace of her. By that point, darkness began to set in, and panic took hold. Over 6 hours had elapsed since she left home, and the family feared the worst. Something awful must have happened to Ardis. They decided it was time to contact the police, but the local department didn't immediately initiate a full-scale search. Since Ardis was 27, authorities first treated her as an adult who might have chosen to disappear voluntarily. Her family, however, refused to sit back and do nothing. They started reaching out to friends and neighbors, pleading for their assistance. Within hours, dozens of volunteers joined in, searching the bike paths around the city late into the night. Yet still, there was no sign of Ardis. The biggest challenge was the vastness of Ottawa's bike trail network. With over 100 miles of routes, no one knew which path she had taken. All they could do was assume she'd chosen the trail nearest to home. By the next morning, the police officially joined the effort. They established a command post at the Aviation Museum, a key location where several major bike trails intersected. They deployed numerous officers and appealed to the public for help. Ardis's photographs were shared with newspapers and television stations, encouraging volunteers to participate in the search. The response from the community was remarkable. In just a few hours, hundreds of locals rallied to the cause, with mounted police, helicopters, and even military personnel being deployed to assist in the operation. Within days, The search for Ardith escalated into one of the largest in Ottawa's history. However, despite the vast manpower and resources, no trace of her was uncovered. News of her disappearance quickly spread throughout the city. Soon, law enforcement was overwhelmed with calls and information. During those initial days, several women stepped forward with disturbingly similar stories. Each woman recounted that they had been approached by a man under questionable circumstances. From their accounts, it became clear that all these women were describing the same individual. Each encounter occurred along bike paths or park trails near the river. Just a short distance from the command post set up by police, one woman reported that he had approached her while she was riding her bike. Appearing friendly at first, he was described as athletic and charming, engaging her in casual conversation. Then, without warning, his demeanor took a menacing turn. He suddenly tried to pull her off her bike and drag her into the nearby woods. Fearful, she fought back and managed to get away. Using the detailed description she provided, investigators created a composite sketch of the suspect. Although they opted not to share it with the public at that moment, police were already flooded with leads and, without any solid evidence linking him to Ardith's disappearance, releasing the sketch could lead to more confusion than clarity. Even if someone identified him, there was no proof tying him to the case, prompting investigators to hold off. Soon after, more women came forward with nearly identical tales. Each one described being approached by a man who matched the same description. Someone who behaved strangely and, in several instances, had attempted to pull them off the trail and into the woods. Then, a fresh lead emerged from a 16-year-old girl who had been cycling in the park after seeing Ardith's photo on the news. She reached out to law enforcement, stating that she had actually seen Ardith there on the day of her disappearance. The teenager informed police that she had ridden past Ardith, but moments later heard a woman scream. When she glanced back, she saw Ardith with a man, seemingly in the midst of an argument. Feeling uncertain, she continued riding, but looked back again and saw the man guiding Ardith into the woods. The scene disturbed her, prompting her to turn around and investigate. Upon her return, both Ardith and the man had vanished. Feeling uneasy yet intrigued, she ventured a short distance into the trees. There, she spotted a hat hanging from a branch, and a few steps further in, two bicycles lying abandoned on the ground. Yet, Ardith and the man were nowhere to be found. Feeling apprehensive, the girl opted not to venture deeper into the woods. She attempted to convince herself that she was overreacting. Perhaps she had simply come across a couple in the midst of a heated discussion. But as she rode away, she thought she heard another scream. She couldn't discern if it was real or merely a figment of her imagination. Later, we see presented with cresting. We see presented. When law enforcement showed her the composite sketch based on the accounts of the other women, she affirmed that it bore a striking resemblance to the man she had seen with Ardith that day. This new lead reinforced the detectives' belief that Ardith had been abducted. It also assisted them in narrowing down the potential location of the crime. They initiated a thorough search of the park, enlisting hundreds of volunteers and even divers to scour the long, twisting river that flowed through the area. For several days following Ardith's disappearance, their persistence finally yielded results. Divers retrieved a bicycle from the river, and the serial number verified it belonged to Ardith's brother. At that moment, detectives began to realize that the odds of finding Ardith alive were extremely slim, and they shifted their focus to searching along the riverbanks. That same day, police received an unusual call, one that stood out from all the other tips. On the line was a man who sounded panicked. He claimed he had unintentionally taken Ardith's life near a bike path. He insisted that it was an accident. Calling it a horrific accident, the caller elaborated that he had partially buried her body close to the riverbank and concealed it with branches. Investigators quickly traced the call to a payphone in a nearby town and rushed to the scene. They hoped to recover fingerprints or DNA evidence that could reveal the identity of the person who made the confession, but investigators yet again found nothing of value. Meanwhile, search dogs were deployed to comb the areas on both sides of the river where Ardith's bike had been found the very next day. The dogs led them to a body lying just a few feet from the water, partially hidden beneath branches. The level of decomposition was so advanced that visual identification was impossible, and the body was devoid of clothing. Still, detectives were almost certain it was Ardith. The remains were sent to the medical examiner while officers scoured the nearby area for any evidence. Yet, there was nothing. No footprints. No personal belongings. No clear indication of the perpetrator. Later forensic analysis confirmed that the victim was indeed Ardith. The autopsy revealed she had drowned, likely held underwater until she lost consciousness. Afterward, her killer dragged her to the riverbank and concealed her with branches. None of her clothing was ever found. It was evident that the killer had taken her clothing with him, while examiners couldn't conclusively confirm whether Ardith had suffered sexual assault. The condition of the scene strongly hinted at that possibility. After her body was found, investigators opted to release a composite sketch of the suspect, which instantly generated a multitude of new leads. Many women reported encounters with a man fitting the description, who had harassed them in local parks, yet none of those tips helped detectives get any closer to identifying him. As time went on, investigators compiled a list of several hundred possible suspects, methodically checking each one. But they still couldn't directly link anyone to Ardith's murder. They also began exploring the possibility that the case might be connected to a serial predator, possibly the same individual who had attacked several women in a nearby town the previous year. The enigmatic call confessing to Ardith's death had even been made from that same vicinity, indicating the two cases might be related. Detectives worked diligently to connect the two cases, but once again they hit a frustrating dead end. Nevertheless, tips continued to flood in, and investigators were shocked by the number of women reporting encounters with a man that resembled the composite sketch. When they plotted the sightings, a troubling pattern emerged. The same man had been spotted in that park at least 19 times during the week leading up to Ardith's disappearance. Even more chilling, one woman stated she saw him there the very next day before Ardith's body was recovered. Detectives speculated he might have returned to the scene, either to better conceal her remains or to retrieve incriminating evidence before police found it. There was also one key detail that witnesses repeatedly noted. The man had an eagle tattoo on his shoulder. Initially, detectives decided to keep that detail under wraps, believing the tattoo could be their most crucial lead. But as weeks passed without an arrest and the investigation turned colder, they chose to share it with the public. This decision ignited a surge of tips, hundreds of calls concerning men with eagle tattoos. Detectives pursued each one diligently, but every lead ended in disappointment. Over the subsequent months, the team continued to sift through an overwhelming influx of over 4,000 tips. They explored every angle, but two specific calls stood out. One came in shortly after Ardith's body was found, and the other arrived months later. Both pointed to the same individual, a local man who happened to live in the very town where the mysterious confession call from the payphone had originated. In fact, he resided just a few blocks from the payphone, where the confession call raised even more doubts. He had a criminal history and a bird tattoo adorning his shoulder. This detail aligned perfectly with witness accounts. Detectives brought him in for questioning, but his demeanor was unsettling. At one moment, he even mocked them, claiming they'd never uncover what he had been up to on the day Ardith was murdered. Because he was as slippery as a scorpion, investigators grilled him for 3 hours but gained no useful information. They summoned him back for a follow-up interview, this time administering a polygraph test. By then, the detectives were almost convinced they had their suspect, until the results astonished them. The examiner found absolutely no signs of deceit. With no concrete evidence to hold him, the investigators had no option but to let him go. The clean results from the polygraph left detectives questioning whether he truly was their suspect. As time went on, the continuous flow of tips dwindled to a mere trickle, though investigators diligently reviewed the old ones one by one. A year after Ardis's murder, the lead detective informed reporters that they were still sifting through a suspect list of approximately 400 men. Most had already been ruled out, but a few remained uncertain. The police even offered a reward of $50,000, the largest in Ottawa's history at that time. Yet it still failed to aid them in identifying the killer. By the 2-year milestone, the leads had become cold and the investigation quietly stalled. That's how things stood until September 2005, when another young woman disappeared in Ottawa. 18-year-old Jennifer Teague. Investigators quickly considered the possibility of a connection, since both cases exhibited striking similarities. However, in the end, no solid connection was ever established. After that, the Ardis case went cold again for nearly another year, and detectives started to worry it might never be resolved. They lacked physical evidence, and despite numerous eyewitness accounts, they still couldn't identify the enigmatic man seen in the park. Then, in May 2006, everything changed. Police in North Bay, a city situated about 190 miles from Ottawa, received a report of an attempted assault. A woman informed them that she had been walking home late at night, when a man approached her, asking if he could accompany her. She declined and continued on her way, but the man persisted in following her, insisting he needed help, and couldn't locate the address he was searching for. As she began to offer him directions, he unexpectedly grabbed her and pulled her into the bushes. He tried to assault her, but her cries brought nearby residents to her aid. One man hurried outside with a shovel, frightening the assailant away. The suspect fled the scene, leaving his phone behind as he ran, a blunder that would prove to be costly. Police quickly traced the device and arrested him. The man turned out to be 25-year-old Christopher Myers, who had recently moved to North Bay from Ottawa. While developing their case, the lead detective recalled hearing about the Ardis Wood investigation at a police conference. He reviewed the materials from that conference and came across a composite sketch of the suspect. The resemblance to Christopher was remarkable. Without hesitation, he sent the information to investigators in Ottawa, who began scrutinizing Myers more closely. Their first revelation was astonishing. Police had already interviewed Christopher. During the initial weeks following Ardis's disappearance, an anonymous caller had identified him as a potential suspect on the hotline. Detectives had investigated, but uncovered nothing substantial linking him to the crime. At that time, he even seemed to have an alibi. The woman who rented him a room informed police that she had seen him earlier that day, and by 3 p.m., he had already left for his job. Since Ardis was believed to have been attacked around 1:30 p.m., it appeared improbable that Christopher could have made it to the park in time. About a year later, however, his name came up again when another tip pointed toward him. This time, investigators decided to dig deeper and brought him in for questioning. He refuted any involvement in Arthur's murder and even rolled up his sleeves to reveal he had no tattoos, which raised doubts among detectives. They were uncertain if he was genuinely their suspect. But with Christopher back on their radar for a third time, especially after he had tried to lure another woman into the bushes, detectives started to see him as their main suspect. However, they still needed solid evidence to support this theory. The first task was to reassess his alibi. Initially, his landlady informed the police that she had seen him at home during the day, which seemingly exonerated him. When investigators spoke with the landlady again, she clarified that she had only seen Christopher in the morning. That minor adjustment changed everything. It meant he had more than enough time to ride his bike from his house to the park, attack Ardis, and still arrive for his afternoon shift. To confirm this, detectives retraced the entire route by bicycle and confirmed that it was entirely feasible. Eventually, they located Christopher in a nearby city. They questioned him once more. At first, he completely denied any involvement, but when detectives told him multiple witnesses had spotted him in the park, his story began to change. He confessed that he had been cycling there that day, and even claimed he spoke briefly with Ardis. According to Christopher, after a brief conversation, Ardis allegedly agreed to accompany him into the woods by the river. Then he claimed another girl showed up, startling Ardis and causing her to fall into the water. He said he left right away but returned later to find she had drowned. At that moment, he supposedly dragged her body to the shore, covered it with branches, and walked away without informing anyone about what had transpired. Detectives instantly recognized his narrative as a total fabrication. Still, his admission that he had interacted with Ardis on the day of her disappearance was significant. Even more revealing, the other girl in his story sounded exactly like the 16-year-old witness, who had reported hearing a scream and saw Ardis with a man before both vanished into the woods. It seemed Christopher had taken the witness's account from the news and distorted it into his own crafted narrative. Shortly thereafter, he changed his story yet again, confessing that everything he had stated was untrue. He now claimed he had never even been in the park, that he only knew about Arthur's case from media coverage, and that his previous account was completely fabricated. Based on what he had seen in reports, detectives then subjected him to a polygraph examination, which he failed. Despite that, Christopher continued to assert his innocence. Lacking any concrete physical evidence, police were unable to charge him with murder just yet. While he remained in custody in the neighboring city, investigators began to dig deeper into his background, seeking a connection to Ardis's death. They uncovered that his mother had battled alcohol and drug addiction during her pregnancy, resulting in Christopher facing developmental and mental health issues from an early age. To complicate matters, she physically abused him until he was 4 years old. He was then adopted by another family, but 8 years later, even they turned their backs on him. His behavior had become deeply unsettling and unmanageable. He spoke to himself incessantly, stripped naked in public, and grew increasingly aggressive every year. One psychologist who treated him even claimed that Christopher was the most frightening child he had ever encountered. On the surface, his adult life appeared more stable. He managed to hold a job, secure housing, and mostly stayed off the police's radar except for a few related arrests. He even had girlfriends, and detectives reached out to some of them to inquire about his past. One expert recounted how Christopher would often explode in anger and would occasionally hit her. She also confirmed that he was perpetually riding his bike around parks. Then she disclosed something that astonished detectives. Christopher had a tendency to give himself temporary tattoos, and on several occasions, she had noticed an eagle tattoo on his shoulder. This became the pivotal piece of evidence, the final piece of evidence that confirmed Christopher was indeed their suspect. Up until that point, the case could have easily unraveled if he hadn't possessed that tattoo. Every previous eyewitness testimony now carried significant weight, as the tattoo directly connected him to the suspect description. The detectives understood they were no longer pursuing mere phantoms. However, this alone wasn't sufficient to take the case to court. They needed a confession 5 months after his arrest for the attempted assault. Investigators brought Christopher back in for questioning. This time, detectives enlisted the help of an experienced investigator from the UK, known for his ability to get suspects to talk. At first, Christopher vehemently denied any involvement in Ardis's murder. But soon after, he reverted back to his previous narrative, claiming he had met her by the river, shared a kiss with her, and that she drowned after being startled by another girl. Almost immediately, he retracted his statement again. Yet not long after, he sketched a map for detectives, indicating where he said he first encountered Ardis, and the location where they allegedly went together. He even agreed to lead them to the spot personally, but once they arrived, Christopher unexpectedly changed his story again, insisting that he didn't recognize the park at all. While Christopher still had not provided a complete confession, his shifting narrative was enough to keep investigators focused on him. However, detectives had another angle. They suspected he might not only be connected to Ardis's murder, but also to a series of unsolved sexual assaults in Ottawa that occurred around the same time. The pattern in each incident was consistent. A man would approach women on the street, start a casual conversation, and then abruptly attack and sexually assault them. When police showed Christopher's photo to the victims, several immediately identified him as their attacker. Armed with this identification, detectives brought him in for another round of questioning. After hours of intense interrogation, Christopher finally broke down and confessed to 5 separate assaults. That confession provided police with the leverage they needed to file additional charges and, combined with all the other evidence, created a much stronger case linking Christopher to Ardis's murder. In the end, he was officially charged with murder, and the case began to move toward trial, a process that stretched over several years. In January 2008, prosecutors offered a plea deal. If he pled guilty, the first-degree murder charge would be downgraded to second-degree murder. Christopher accepted the deal. He acknowledged approaching Ardith on the bike path, dragging her into the woods with the intent to assault her, and then drowning her in the river. He also pled guilty to several other attacks on women. For these crimes, he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. The reduced sentence was part of the plea agreement, but it did not guarantee that Christopher would ever walk free. His first chance at parole came in 2015, but the board denied it outright. He made another attempt in 2020, only to be rejected once again. Experts pointed out that even after 15 years incarcerated, he remained highly likely to reoffend. As of today, Christopher remains in prison, and it's doubtful he will ever be released. Ardis Wood's murder became one of Ottawa's most infamous cases, leaving a lasting scar in the community. Women became apprehensive about walking alone in parks or cycling by themselves, prompting locals to form volunteer patrols and group rides to keep each other safe and prevent similar tragedies. Although Christopher admitted to several assaults, detectives suspected he had committed many more. Unfortunately, not all victims managed to see his face, rendering it impossible to definitively link him to every attack. If you found this case intriguing, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We post true crime case videos every night. Until next time, stay sharp, stay vigilant.